Good evening. I have a confession to make. Alas, I am not Susan Phillips. I am Callum Carmichael. I'm the new director of Carleton University School of Public Policy and Administration. And in this capacity, whoa, there we are. And I have this lovely opportunity to thank you for attending this, which is our second celebration of philanthropy, to commemorate the second Summer Institute for our students in our graduate programs in nonprofit philanthropy and nonprofit leadership. Yes, give yourself a hand. Yeah. Thank you for coming, and thank you in particular, President O'Reilly Runta, for attending, and would you please welcome people on behalf of the university.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for being here. It is a pleasure to welcome you on behalf of Carleton University. And usually I give the full history of the university, and today I thought I'd spare you that. And I would just tell you that this is a building that symbolizes what this conference stands for. If you think about it, it's an extremely sustainable building. The green wall, one of the 3 greenest buildings in the country. And downstairs, there's a sculpture of a tree. And those of you who are very observant, or who observe on your way out, will note that the tree is upside down. And it is standing on its branches, and where the roots were go up to the sky. And so, in a sense, this building symbolizes what we do at this university. We're sustainable. We're thinking about the future, we're environmentally friendly, and we like to think out of the box, turn ideas upside down, and think in new ways about how we can solve the problems of today and tomorrow. And I know that this conference dealing with philanthropy and specializing in women is looking at both the solution for the future and an out-of-the-box solution for the future. And I think that's wonderful. And when I was thinking about what I could say and find one word for you, I thought of the word osotua, and it's a Maasai word, one of the few Maasai words I know. And this word has an interesting triple meaning. You know how if you say bread, it means dough, or say dough, and it means money, or it could be that what makes bread, right? Well, osotua means beauty. It means peace, and it also means umbilical cord. And you know, you can sort of see how dough, you could eat it, and how that could be related to money and bread. But how does umbilical cord get related to peace and beauty? But then you think about it, we are all related one to another. And that relationship comes through an umbilical cord that brings us into the world. We are brought into the world attached to somebody else. And it is that attachment with other human beings that creates peace in the world. And without peace, there will be no beauty. And so it is nice that that word means those 3 things. And I think it's very interesting that I could link it to women, because with very few exceptions, or almost none, depending on your theological bent, we are all come into the world the same way. And that means that women are the link between every other person. Every person, man or woman, is linked to a woman and to caring and sharing. And so therefore, should not be a surprise that women should be philanthropists and lead the world in philanthropy when they get the opportunity, when they have the jobs, when they have the opportunity to lead, that they would lead in philanthropy as well as in any other area. But you could turn this around, and you could say, like that tree upside down, that philanthropy is not only a matter for women, and it's not necessarily a matter just for women, because every man came into earth the same way, and every human being must share and care. And in the world today, we need to think about peace and beauty. We need to think about ways that we can make the good things sustainable. And it's the creativity, the joy of doing that, the passion that we have to make those things happen, and the opportunity that we all share, men or women, to help each other in philanthropy and in our everyday acts. So I thank you for your everyday act of being here, and I thank you for listening to this wonderful panel, and I can't wait to hear them either. So thank you very much.
That's a wonderful theme to start with, and linking women in philanthropy. Thank you very much for that, that insight. And indeed, in terms of being inventive, turning the world upside down, we're delighted that this is a program that is the first of its kind in Canada, that sees in the philanthropic sector an opportunity to improve society and to provide people either who are working in the sector, who are planning to do so, with the skills and training that will allow them to contribute more to peace and beauty and a better society. So thank you for that. I have the pleasure of teaching in the Summer Institute with Susan Phillips. I co-teach the course Foundations in Philanthropy and Civil Society. And in the first week, we talk about philanthropy. And we talk about it having defined it in a non-sentimental way. We look at it in 4 dimensions. First, as a personal dimension. Then as a societal one, where personal decisions result in societal patterns, certain sectors receiving, certain forms taking place. We then look at it as an ethical phenomenon that can be assessed normatively in terms of its consequences, or the principles that guide it, or the human traits that underlie it. And finally, as an historical practice that has evolved over time. Now, I'm presenting this because I tell the students this selection of personal, societal, ethical, and historical has a purpose, because these ways of looking at philanthropy are cascading. Each contributes to the next. And we never, although we start with it as a personal phenomenon, we never leave it as being intimately connected with what a person values, what they do, and the choices that they exercise. I raise this notion of philanthropy as always being personal because although our 4 panelists are here because of their professional engagement with philanthropy, albeit as fundraisers perhaps, or as givers, or as financial advisors, if you look at their biographies, you'll see that that professional linkage and the personal affiliation is really inseparable, that their engagement in philanthropy is really an act of not simply a job, but a vocation and a life choice. So I am very grateful to their participation and also what they represent, the blending of the personal and the professional. They are, from your left, working across the panel, Keith Sjögren, who is Senior Consultant and Managing Director of Consulting at Investor Economics, and he is the lead researcher on the report on Canadian women and philanthropy, published by TD Waterhouse Canada. To his next is Joanne Ryan, Vice President, Philanthropic Advisory Services at TD Waterhouse. Beside Joanne is Coralie Lalonde, founder and CEO of the early stage or angel investment group, Katsura Investments. And on the end, Sharilyn Hale, founder and principal of Watermark Philanthropic Advising. Now, as our format, Keith and Joanne will introduce the report, give us a summary overview, and then Keith has double duty both as moderator, panelist, and general shepherder of his fellow panelists, and then there'll be questions that we look forward to engaging with you in the audience on the theme of women in philanthropy. Keith and Joanne.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. And I just want to give you a little bit of a background in terms of why TD decided to do this. And TD Wealth has been researching the habits the habits of women in terms of their investments. We actually, for years now, have what we call our Women's Investor Strategy. We've learned that women make investment decisions very differently than men do. And we suspected that they probably make philanthropic decisions differently than men do also. We found there was really not a lot of research or data available on women in philanthropy in Canada. There is certainly information available on women in philanthropy, but it's out of the US and it's out of Australia. And we thought it would be really great to get some qualitative and quantitative data on Canadian women in philanthropy. We wanted the research to be independent, so we hired Keith Sjögren on my right from Investor Economics, And the research really comprised of both qualitative and quantitative research. We ran focus groups with women philanthropists in the major cities right across the country. We got to hear from very passionate, fantastic women. And then with investor economics, doing quantitative research, we've come out with a very comprehensive report. So I know the students have access to it online. We have hard copies for anybody else who would like to leaf through it. It's fairly lengthy, between 40 and 50 pages, but we believe it's the start of a conversation that's going to encourage philanthropy, get a lot of women talking about it, and be a real starting point to continue to increase women in philanthropy in Canada. So investor economics provides lots of great stats, and I'm going to just have Keith share a few of the stats on women and wealth.
Thank you, Joanne. The first thing that we did when we were given this task was to take a look at women in the economy. Really, before you can look at women as donors, we needed to understand how women were situated in the Canadian economy. And we found, for example, that women at the end of 2012 controlled 1.1 trillion in financial wealth in Canada. That's a substantial amount of wealth. We found that their aggregate income at the end of 2011 was $443 billion and has been growing significantly over the last 10 years. And we found, too, that women pay a lot of taxes, that in the end of 2011 they had paid $55 billion in taxes, that primarily income taxes. We didn't include the sales tax that are paid by women, which according to men is significant. One of the other things that we looked at was the transfer of wealth that is likely to take place over the next decade, and we have estimated that to be around $900 billion. And if you look at the inheritance patterns, they are both horizontal from one spouse to another, and vertical from one generation to another. And if you look at the recipients, they are, in the main, going to go from men to women horizontally, and equally likely to go from a mother to a daughter. And we've estimated, sort of on the back of an envelope, that of that 900 billion, at least 600 billion is going to end up in the hands of women. So that the wealth that women will control is not going to be generated by the assets that they currently own and the income that they generate themselves, but also through the inheritances that they receive. So a significant amount of wealth in terms of both financial wealth and total assets is going to be controlled by women in the next decade. So with that, we took a look at women and their importance to charities. And we found that between 2002, 2012, the donations made by women, and this is just CRA data, went from 1.9 billion to 3 billion. So a significant increase in the amount of giving. The number of women donating over that period increased by 9%. And I hate to say it, but the actual number of men donating declined by 3% during that same period. We also looked at volunteer hours and found that women, not surprisingly, give more in volunteer hours than men do. And they gave a total of over 2 billion hours of volunteer time. And once we had looked at the economic impact of women in Canada, once we had looked at their relationships with charities, the support they provide to charities, we made a conservative estimate that about 350,000 women in Canada are positioned to give a major gift. And we determined a major gift to be a gift of over $10,000. So a substantial opportunity and a substantial amount of wealth that is resident with Canadian women.
Thank you. So great news story. Women are certainly gaining in wealth. And we talked in our focus groups about what motivates women to give. And just a couple of comments I'm going to make. It was apparent that the women, even though they were major philanthropists, they definitely did not all come from wealth. In fact, many of them came from families with 11 siblings, and they were very poor. But what was really common among all of the women philanthropists that were in our groups is they really had embedded family values. So they came from families where giving, helping your neighbor, growing a garden to feed the community was just part of their natural upbringing. And that seemed to be a common thread across the focus groups. Many of the women really believed and came to a realization that they had more money than they needed, and it was just that simple, that they could start making a substantial difference with their philanthropy. Family events, death of a spouse, coming face to face with a need were often great motivators. And a lot of the women focused on maybe 3 causes in order to have an impact. They wanted to avoid spreading themselves too thin. They wanted to make an impact with roughly 3 charities. Some of the women wanted to support very local charities so they could see in front of them the impact that they were having. Other women, again, very, very engaged, were focused on global strategies and used their love of travel to go visit and assess the impact that they were having. Areas of agreement, education of women and girls, poverty, vulnerable youth, social justice, and the arts were common causes. We found one of the main differences, again, is women will do a lot of due diligence before committing to making a major gift. So from a fundraising perspective, it'll take longer to close that large gift with a woman than it will for a man. It's not uncommon for women to start volunteering with the charity in order to get a handle on what's going on within the charity, understand the people there, get to know the board, get to know the staff, analyze reports, publications. Women are interested in building relationships with organizations that they'll be making major commitments to. Couple of constraints. Obviously, women are time-starved. Many are looking after kids. Many are in the sandwich generation, also looking after older parents. We found one of the questions that I'm asked is, were there any differences that you found as you conducted these focus groups across the country? And while we saw many similarities, we did see some differences. For example, some cities, I'll give you an example, Calgary, many of the people that are living there did not grow up in Calgary. In fact, they've been parachuted in there for jobs that they're currently working on today. So they don't necessarily have that same sense of community that other women have that have grown up in Ottawa or a small town. We also saw an opinion that there's some women that perhaps could get more engaged in some of those communities. Generally, and I'm not going to go through the details of the report. As I said, it's about 40 or 50 pages, so we really encourage you to take a look at it. We really did the report to just get the conversation going and start a discussion in terms of looking at the huge opportunity with women gaining in wealth and how we can leverage that opportunity to get more women engaged and tap into this huge potential of wealth that there is there.
Thanks, Joanne, very much. What we're going to do now is I'm actually going to ask each of the panel members to provide a commentary, provide observations. They've all read the report. Well, Joanne certainly was a primary driver of this report. Coralie was part of the Ottawa focus group that we had. And Sharilyn has been provided with the report a few days ago, I think. So
I've read it thoroughly.
They've read it thoroughly, so they've done their homework. So what I'm going to ask them each individually to provide you with some comments, some observations about the report and the findings of the report. Perhaps I can start from my far left with you, Sharilyn.
Mixing it up a little bit there. I was supposed to be last, but I'm ready.
Yeah.
All right. First of all, I'm just thrilled and delighted to be here. I do have a graduate degree in philanthropy that I earned in the US, and I know how transformational that experience was for me as a learner and as a practitioner. So kudos to all of you here for making that commitment. So I've worked in fundraising and philanthropy for almost 20 years. The last 4 as an independent consultant, working with charities on their fund development and board governance strategies, but also supporting philanthropists in their giving. Most relevant for this topic is for 8 years I led the philanthropy program for the YWCA in Toronto. And this was my gender education in terms of issues of equity, social justice, advocacy, and feminism, understanding the broader women's community, and learning as a fundraiser how to develop and manage a fundraising program that reflected those values as opposed to clashing with those values, but perhaps that's a topic for another panel. So there are 3 areas that I'll focus my remarks on. And the first is about stories. And in my experience, women reflect their life stories and their values in their giving, often in very personal ways. So understanding where they're coming from is incredibly important work. And the research suggests that women donors want this to be acknowledged in our interactions with them. The wife of an industry titan who inherited and then gave her husband's fortune after he died after 60 years of violent abuse behind closed doors. The successful corporate leader who had an abortion as a young woman and who felt strongly that other young women should have that choice also. The immigrant entrepreneur who broke gender and racial barriers and knew other immigrant women had the same potential. The young mother with a large trust fund who actively rejected being a socialite, taking her first thoughtful steps as a philanthropist, wanting to make it count and to be an example for her children. You may say that everyone has a story, and that's true. But I have observed that women love to share their stories and help each other connect the dots between and among themselves and learn from each other. And it's not just about their own stories, but it's also about the stories of those who are impacted by their giving. And so I think as a sector and for fundraisers, we have to create opportunities for this story making and this story sharing. Secondly is volunteerism. So for example, the YWCA is almost 150 years old, and we had lifelong volunteers and donors who were in their 90s and their 100s and who still donated. They came to annual meetings. They asked thoughtful questions about the organization and about the financial statements. The YWCA reflected their values, and their life's work was their communal meeting place, their contribution, and their legacy. They built it. And there are many other charities and institutions in Canada that have a similar history, right? But things are changing and have changed. The research touches on declining volunteerism with a parallel desire for connection and community among women. The changing nature of volunteerism and the increased professionalization of our sector has implications for philanthropic and institutional commitment, and I believe we have to wrestle with this in a meaningful way. How do we create space and connection and place in a way that all our donors say, we built it? Third is leadership. And when I was at the YWCA, I had the privilege of leading an $80 million capital campaign for the YWCA Elm Center, which is now built, and it's affordable and supportive housing for women with mental health issues and their children, certainly along the women-friendly themes of social justice and poverty reduction. It was a very successful campaign, and it was led by women. The campaign cabinet members were all women, with one exception, and we were very nice to him all the time. And we had a number of $1 million gifts and above. All but one were given by women. And for most campaigns, the inverse is true. And for me, that's a very powerful message about the power of women's philanthropy. As reflected in this research, decision-making cycles were longer. Social, educational, cultivation events were plentiful and crucial. And confidence in our stable and long-term leadership was key. Some of the women that we asked for leadership gifts had never been asked before. They had either been dismissed or overlooked, or only their partners had been asked. We did struggle to find women volunteers for the cabinet with campaign experience, but chose to prioritize passion for the project, and that was absolutely the right choice and is actually best fundraising practice, quite frankly. But as a result, there are now more women philanthropists that have major campaign experience. Of course, as sector leaders, we know there's an important relationship between fundraising leadership and governance leadership. In the case of the YWCA, we only invite women to serve on the board, but there are many other organizations that do very well in terms of women's representation. But lots more work needs to be done to ensure women are welcomed at the highest levels of leadership, the board, campaign cabinet, advisory councils, and so forth. And not just to warm a seat. I think one of the phrases that I heard was table candy, right? Just being at the table to represent the gender, but not really being viewed seriously in terms of genuine power sharing and decision making, and that's important. For all of us who work in the sector, but I think specifically for fundraisers, we also must not perpetuate the status quo of exclusively pushing traditional forms of influence and affluence over passion for the mission, which may exclude women philanthropists from leadership who don't fit the typical profile. Women philanthropists have said in this report that they desire this engagement and that it will lead to greater investment. I'll just note in closing that identity, let alone gender identity, is very complex. And while we can look at aggregate research and data for themes and general understanding, and I believe there's tremendous value in doing that, we must also be very careful that we don't make assumptions about individuals, especially women, because assumptions can easily become or grow out of stereotypes. There are women of all orientations, ethnicities, lifestyles, political stripes, beliefs, and even some women who want to be defined as philanthropists and not women philanthropists. So our role is to build strong relationships and to get to know our donors and prospects, and from this basis, we can support them in their giving most effectively. This is what the research says and what women philanthropists are asking of all of us.
Thank you very much indeed. Now I'm going to call on Rosalie to Coralie, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
To provide a comment.
Sure. As Sharilyn said, we all have a story, and I have a story, and I love to share it. So she's quite right. Oh, the mic just came on. Okay. So I'm going to share my story with you a little bit today and weave some of the results of this research in through my story, if you don't mind. Very happy to be here. In terms of motivation, there were a number of motivations that the research talked about. Some of them family values, financial wealth, identifying with a need or a major life event. For me, growing up, I don't think we ever gave to charity. I don't recall ever seeing any charitable giving. But I did have a very strong sense of community. I'm a base brat. My dad was in the military. And every one of our neighbors were working with him, so you couldn't get away with anything. And my community was anybody in a green uniform, really. And I did have strong family values. So I think I was prepared for philanthropy, even though I hadn't seen it modeled growing up. And when I graduated from Carleton, best university ever. When I graduated from Carleton, I started a company, and I worked solid for 8 years. I didn't even look up from a computer. That's all I did. And then through the sale of a couple of my companies, I suddenly found myself in a position of wealth. So that's my motivator. I had a position of wealth, and I looked up, and I realized I don't have any meaning in my life. I resonated so well with the participant who mentioned that. Like, what am I doing that's meaningful? I'm designing phones. The world doesn't need another phone. What it needs is some change. And so that's what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. I wanted to make a difference. Only I had not a clue how to go about doing that. I didn't know about the charities in town. I didn't know what was happening, nothing. So I called up Volunteer Ottawa, which I found on the web, went down there, got myself a volunteer job. That's where I started. And I got myself a job that allowed me great exposure to all the charities in town. So I got to learn about the charitable sector. And my philanthropic giving was whoever asked. I really didn't know what difference I wanted to make. So my friends would say, you know, oh, I have a bike run or you know, cure for cancer or whatever event they were going to, and I'd just give to whoever asked. I didn't have a strategy. And I realized very quickly that that's like drinking from a fire hose. There are a million great causes out of there, and I care about most of them, like almost all of them. So how am I going to do this? Of course I want to help improve the life of anyone facing challenges. I want puppies to have homes. I want to cure cancer. I want the planet to be clean. But I can't solve all of these problems myself, so I needed to focus. And then I brought things down to 4 areas. I know the average is 3, but I'm a super achiever, so I picked 4. So 4 areas that I care about. And then I had to learn the very, very hard lesson of saying no to all these other great causes. And please, if you get into this industry, think about the guilt involved in that, because it's really hard to say no to great causes. And sometimes I feel guilty when I do. So, so that was my motivation. I resonated as well with the international comments of people who travel tend to care more internationally or give more internationally. And my husband and I are quite the travelers. But it's not a motivation based out of that travel and making a difference internationally. It's actually I had to really think about it when I read those results. When we travel somewhere, we always end up feeling like we're taking a special piece of that place back with us in our hearts. And so we feel like we need to leave a little piece as well. And an example would be we were in Rwanda a couple years ago, gorilla trekking in the morning, and then we hung out with these kids in the local village every afternoon, and they were just great fun, just magical people, and had a really wonderful time. And I'm still in email contact with about a dozen of these kids who do it on their phone because they don't have internet access, but they all have a cell phone. And so what they don't know is that I fund all of their education. They don't know that. I did it through an organization, but I wanted to leave just that little piece as a thank you to the great experience that I had from this visit with these kids. I just want to make a couple of comments about the due diligence part. I think I differ a little bit from the research here. In my other life, I run an angel investment group, so I invest in high-tech startup companies. We were always known as angels until several years ago when Dragon's Den came out, and now we're known as dragons, which I'm not quite sure how I feel about that. I kind of liked angel a little bit better, but dragons. I actually saw the show for the first time a couple of weeks ago, and we're not that mean. So I actually see a lot of parallel between my maturity, so to speak, of growing as an investor, as an angel investor, and my growing as an investor or a donor or philanthropist. When I first started investing, we do due diligence on companies. So I spent a lot of time doing due diligence on companies. What's their market? What's their product? You know, can they build this thing? How are they going to sell it? All of these different things. And I'd spend a lot of time writing up really complicated agreements to protect myself from this investment, make sure my money's going to come out first, and make sure there's a board seat, and I'm represented on the board. And more complicated the agreements got, and more due diligence was done so that I could make an intelligent decision. And I learned a couple of things from this experience. The first thing I learned was there's no way I'm going to be an expert in this. I will never have the expertise that the founders of this company have. So why am I trying to develop that kind of expertise? I should just find people I trust and invest in them instead. The other thing I learned is that not one single company was doing what it said it was going to do by the time 3 years had passed. They were all doing something different because, of course, they recognized the changing needs in the community, in their market, in their product, and they altered it for that. So I'd spend a lot of time doing due diligence on things that don't get built. So it's just kind of wasting my time. And finally, I realized that these complicated agreements were just a big, huge waste of time. I can't protect myself. The best way to protect myself is to align myself with the people that I'm investing with. If we're all trying to build a successful company and we're all going to gain in the same way, then let's just build a successful company together instead of trying to, you know, put everything into paper. The same thing applied for philanthropy. When I first started out, I'd spend a lot of time trying to figure out, is this the right donation? Is this the right program? Is this... so I'd spend a lot of time, and I started spending a lot of time getting reports. I want an application. I want outcome reports. I want all of this complicated stuff. And then the light bulb went off one day, and I realized this isn't the right way to go about it. So now there's a few things that I recognize. One, I'm never going to be an expert in the area that I give. The people that are actually running that charity, they're the experts. So I just need to trust them that they know how best to use my money. Instead of getting them to convince me of something. And usually what happens is they're trying to convince me by getting into my head and thinking about what I might fund as opposed to what the cause really needs. And so I'd rather just let them spend the money on the things that they really need. The second is that not all of the things that charities need are fundable. There's a lot of things that aren't fundable. I was working with Volunteer Ottawa, and the staff kept complaining about their computers and how long they take to start up. Like everybody in the universe complains, right? It takes forever to start up, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, I wasn't listening at all. And then one day I had a meeting with the executive director, and she turned on her computer, and 10 minutes later, it started up. It was like it was running DOS, okay? And we sat there waiting, and then she tried to open a spreadsheet, and it was another 5 minutes. So I went home, and I called a friend of mine who was an IT expert and said, okay, we're buying a new computer system for Volunteer Ottawa. Pick one out, set it up, let's get this going, because this is crazy. So, you know, and there was nowhere for them to get funding for computers. Nobody funds computers, but that's what they needed to do the work. I also fund small charities. Mainly because I'm just appreciating that the gap between the rich and the poor charities is growing. And those without the resources just don't have the capability of developing those resources. So I like to focus on them. But I take a no strings attached approach to my charitable giving now. I find that charity, that the cause that I care about, and then I give them the money and I tell them, please use it in the best way possible, whatever that is. Whatever program that is. Don't write me a report. Give me a call sometime, and we could spend 5 minutes on the phone instead of 5 days writing a report for me. And what I've discovered is that, you know, it used to be about protecting the money. Well, what if they misuse my money? In my experience, nobody to date has ever misused money. And in fact, they've leveraged it and stretched every single dollar to an amazing degree, way more than I could ever do. And so I'd rather they just focus on the cause and not focus on me as a donor. And finally, I think that it's really important to fund things that charities sometimes don't recognize our priorities. So especially the little guys. Let me give you an example. I was at the Rideau Valley Wildlife Sanctuary, and I was doing spring cleaning for them. So everything comes out of the cupboards, and we bleach everything and put everything back. And as I'm going through, I'm recognizing all of the things that they need, desperately need, but would never, ever buy. Because when you're making a decision between buying a plastic bin to store stuff in and feeding a bunny, an orphan bunny, you're always going to go for the orphan bunny. And you never buy the plastic bin. And so going out and recognizing these things that are never going to be a priority and just purchasing them and giving it to them means they don't have to make that decision themselves between the bunny and the bin. And so that's another thing that I really like to do. But bottom line, it's about people. In the same way that my company investments are about people, I need to find people who care as much as I do, and probably more, about the causes that I care about, and then give them the help they need to make that difference and help them with it. And that's what I like to do. Thanks very much for listening.
Thanks, Jen. Thank you, Coralie. Joanne.
Thank you, Coralie. Thank you, Keith. I'm going to make a couple of comments on certain aspects of the report. And the first one is about tax. I'm not giving you a dry tax seminar, I promise. But what was pretty common in the focus groups is that tax is not a #1 priority or consideration when women are contemplating a gift. And while they say it wasn't important, a number of the women in the focus groups that we did deal with had set up foundations or donor-advised funds. So while they're not talking about tax, at some point there was a transaction or an event in their life where mitigating tax and establishing this type of formal structure was very, very beneficial. I spend a lot of time advising donors. I also do a lot of training with private bankers, portfolio managers, trust officers to ensure that they're incorporating philanthropy in their overall financial and estate plans. And while tax, I just want to make a couple of comments about tax. Tax is never the #1 motivator for giving. Because at the end of the day, once you've made your gift and you receive the tax benefit, you're still out of pocket. So you're not going to make any money through the tax incentives surrounding giving. But the way our tax system works is if you have any income or you have any wealth in Canada, you can either, you will be paying your taxes, so your social capital will end up here in Ottawa, and you can let the people in Ottawa decide how to allocate, or you can decide to take some of that tax back through the credits that are available and allocate them to things that are important to you. And in all of the clients that I've advised, when we look at the beneficiaries of our estate being family, friends, and Ottawa, when I ask the question, would you like to reduce what CRA gets and maximize what families and friends get, the answer is always yes. And in fact, there was only one case where a woman actually said to me that she liked paying tax because she thought the government was doing a good job. But when I chatted with her a little further and understood the two causes that she was supporting, my next question was, well, do they have enough money to be able to do what it is they need to do? No, they don't. So then we decided, well, why don't you take the tax refund that you get from your gift and give it back? And then you actually have the gift that keeps on giving, which really resonated very well with her. So, what I say about tax is that, well, it's not the #1 motivator. You do need to have a charitable intent, and we know that women do have a strong charitable intent. If you give with effective tax strategies, it allows you to give more. And I just want to thank Don Johnson for all the tireless work he's done. And we have him to thank for eliminating the capital gains tax for donating appreciated securities. And that has resulted in a huge surge in donations of appreciated securities that otherwise you would have to sell and pay 50% of the capital gains tax. Don continues to lobby tirelessly for elimination of capital gains for donating private company shares and real estate, which we thank you, and we have faith that it will come in time. So again, thank you. The women that we met were all unique. I'm just going to give you a couple examples. In Toronto, we had one participant who took her love of music and live concerts to support not the arts directly, but to Baycrest, a hospital specializing in complex needs of aging seniors 19 years ago, and then replicated the successful program at Princess Margaret, a cancer hospital. And due to her generosity and creative vision on a weekly basis, live concerts provide much enjoyment and healing for patients, visitors, and staff at these hospitals. We had another philanthropist, I could go on, took her newfound passion for motorcycles to fund the purchase of motorcycles to be used by an organization called Tosten in Africa, to funnel people and supplies around and to improve access and to empower education to thousands of community members in hard-to-reach rural areas. We had another woman in Calgary who, her son is an adult now, but at the age of 8 had been in the hospital over 30 times with very complex medical conditions. And as she would, luckily he's fine today, but as she would leave these hospital visits, she noticed that people were sleeping in the parking lot in their cars. And that's simply because they're here from rural areas with sick children and didn't have the money to be able to afford a hotel. So what does she do? She literally founded a Ronald McDonald House next to that hospital in order to accommodate that. There's general consensus of the importance of funding education, particularly for women and girls. And I've learned firsthand from Bev Wybrow, who actually recently retired from the Canadian Women's Foundation, that when you help women, there's a ripple effect. Women go on to help their children and families and their communities. So strong interest in funding women. If the opportunities for growth are to be realized, it will require the participation of a broader community of women. Charities do need to raise their profile with women, and they need to do that by developing relationships rather than only focusing on soliciting a financial gift. In fact, we had one woman who was actually very interested in supporting a particular cause, and then when she received the package in the mail, it was too glitzy, too expensive, and way too fancy for how she felt the charity should be spending the money, and discarded it and decided that that cause was not right for her. I think we have opportunities. I think we've heard that the board of directors of charitable organizations tend to be male-dominated, despite the fact that women are frequently employed as executives, donors, and volunteers of charities. Another thing we heard from women is they really want to see less competition amongst charities and a lot more collaboration. Sometimes it's very hard to decide which charity, when it comes to a certain cause, what is this one doing versus that one? Is there not an opportunity to collaborate? And charities would do very well with women donors if they look for those opportunities. Social media has grown in importance as a tool for engaging informed donors, and internet-based surveys indicate women are the majority of users of Twitter and Facebook. Facebook account holders who follow one or more charities tend to be females under the age of 35. And overall, the research, very, very positive, shows women have the ability to make significant changes to our society. They are growing in wealth. They're growing in entrepreneurship. Women are growing in representation on corporate boards. 60% of university graduates are women. Life expectancy for women is approximately 4 years longer than life expectancy for men. Sorry, men. Don't shoot the messenger. But and then, as Keith said, between 2012 and 2022, and thank you, Investor Economics, for all these great stats. The wealth transfer in Canada is estimated to be $895 billion, with a lot of that, is going to end up in the hands of women who have the potential to really make a huge difference. So the women in our focus groups who give generously of their time, talent, and treasure personify the words of Margaret Mead, who wrote, "Never believe that a few caring people can't change the world, for indeed that's all who ever have."
Thank you very much. All right, what we're going to do, I'm going to ask the panel one question, and then we're going to open it up to questions from the audience. One of the things that we asked during the research process was how do we enlarge the community of women donors? And some of the things that we heard early on were stories about, well, one of the problems is that there's a decline in participation in organized religion. And it was people who had a religious background that actually were prominent donors. And we heard, too, that the urbanization of Canada is a challenge, that people who grow up in small communities tend to have embedded giving values. And, you know, quite a lot of women also said that there are a number of women who would like to volunteer, who would like to give more, but they have very active professional and family lives, and time is a challenge. So that, as a bit of a background, perhaps I can ask each of the panelists to comment on the question is, how can we grow the community? How can we support and grow the community of women donors? And perhaps to mix it up, I'll ask you, Coralie, to start.
Sure. Well, I think that, I mean, there's a number of ways, but the one I'm going to focus on is I think there's a responsibility for women donors to help women donors become philanthropists. And I'll use as an example, thank you to TD Bank. I went to this focus group of this research, and there were a couple of people I knew there, but there were a lot of people I'd never met before, these really fascinating women doing really incredible things. So afterwards, we all kind of said, why don't we get together? And so everybody came over for lunch at my place one day, and we just got to know each other a little bit better. We chatted about the types of things that we're interested in, and we decided to meet quarterly. And so the way it's going to work is we're rotating it around to each other's houses, and then the hostess gets to send out a question ahead of time for us to talk about, something donor related. And she also picks another woman who is going to share a story of an experience they've had with a charity and the things that they learned. So it's not about donating, it's about learning. So what did they learn through this experience with this charity? And so there's a great opportunity for all of us to learn from each other. Another example is when I was with the Community Foundation with Bibi, we started a program called Engage, where we had 350 entrepreneurs sign an agreement that when they become successful, they're going to give back to their community. And that program had an education component so people could come in and learn about the different charitable sectors and the different areas and different charities. And still to this day, I get entrepreneurs who have sold their company and give me a call and say, I haven't forgotten that promise I made to you that when I sell my company, I'm going to give back to the community, and this is what I want to do, and let's talk about it. So I think as donors, we can learn from each other.
Thanks very much. Sharilyn?
You know, there was a wonderful thing that we did at the YWCA, and I think the YW, it's a unique situation that it is a women's organization, so there's a natural affinity and constituency group among women. I know not all organizations are like that, but we developed a wonderful event program among our higher level women philanthropists. And we called it an evening of mentorship and sharing. And we brought our women philanthropists together with women from the employment programs that the YWCA ran. So many of these women were new to Canada. They had either never been in the workforce or had been out of the workforce for a long time. But the purpose of the evening was mentorship and sharing, and it wasn't just one directional. So it wasn't, you know, I'm a very successful corporate leader and entrepreneur, and you're going to learn from me. It was very much about mutual learning and sharing, and we structured the evening in a way where both sides of the table, if you will, had to bring a piece of discussion or a topic that was about mentoring. So the Women in the Employment Program offering something to mentor the donor, and a story to share about her own experience. And then the same for the philanthropist, to give a nugget or a principle or something that would mentor the Women in the Employment Program, and also a story from her own personal experience. It was a wonderful program because what it did was connected our philanthropists with the recipients of their giving, but it also leveled the playing field, right, in terms of that mutual sharing and learning, which I think is very profound, and it's important for women. And when we held those events, honestly, I mean, there were tears and hugs, and it was so powerful for our women donors because they felt such a personal connection. They didn't just give, they also received, right? And so we talked a lot about the power of philanthropy to be a turning point in the life of others, but also a turning point in my life as a philanthropist. And I think, you know, as on the sector side, the fundraiser side, the more that we can create those opportunities, that is helping to build communities of women philanthropists, and that has spin-offs that we can never anticipate or know.
Thank you. Joanne, the last word.
Thank you. What resonated me in the report was that women felt that there was nowhere to go to get really good information about how to analyze a charity, how to develop a philanthropic plan, how to know that their giving is effective, how to measure the impact of their giving. Some said, yes, there are community foundations, and community foundations will offer to provide this type of advice to you. But you know, they felt their underlying objective is to try to get you to open a fund with the community foundation. They also felt similarly that charities will be happy to help you with that advice, but really, you know, their underlying objective is to really get you to donate to that particular charity. So for me, the biggest, and I know we have some fantastic, you know, we have Philanthropic Foundations Canada. If you have a foundation, you can be members of Philanthropic Foundations Canada and network with other foundations and get some great information. But what if you don't have a foundation? What if you have just come into new money? And how do you get this information? So really, the idea of putting this report together is to start the conversation. It's not to do a 40, 50-page report that now you've all read it, put it on the shelf, and go on and do your jobs. It's really for us to start engaging women in conversation. So I see, for example, at TD, I see ongoing conversations with women to educate, to train, to get them to connect, to get them to share, to give good information on how to evaluate charities. And talking earlier about some of the stats from investor economics, and one of them that really resonates with me now is 10, 15 years ago, if you were talking to a high net worth client, most likely their money was family money that had been inherited. And you know, as per investor economic stats, today 2/3 of the high net worth clients it is new money for them. They have gone out and made it themselves. So they haven't been taught how to give. They haven't learned about philanthropy. This is new money for them. They don't necessarily turn into a philanthropist overnight, but they've made it. They're probably pretty smart. They want to learn about philanthropy. They want to be engaged, and we need to provide opportunities, venues for conversations and education for these people to take, women included, to take. Many of these are women, as women entrepreneurs have grown in numbers, to take their philanthropy to the next level.
Thank you. What we'd like to do now is to invite questions to the panel from the audience. There are a couple of microphones if you need them, but if you don't need them, just raise your hand and shout. So,
hello?
Yep,
Hi.
You're good.
Hi. Okay. Hi, I'm Andre. I'm a student in the Masters of Philanthropy program. And this week, we had a class about board governance. And I was just wondering if you guys could speak to the issue of women underrepresentation on boards of nonprofits and charities.
Who's going to take that one? Joanne?
Well, it definitely came out in our report that women, despite the fact that they are, heavily employed by charities, they are volunteers for charities, they are donors for charities, they are underrepresented on charitable boards. We know on corporate boards they're underrepresented. However, steps have been taken, and we continue to take steps to encourage and get more women participating in corporate boards. So I think there's a few reasons for that, and women sometimes underestimate their ability to take on a board position. I think that if you ask a man to come and sit on a board, and I run the Private Giving Foundation, and I have, I'm the executive director. I have a board of directors, and when I ask a man to come on the board, they ask for very little information. Yes, no problem, I'm on it. And when I ask a woman, and I'm talking women that have sold businesses, have achieved all kinds of success, they want all kinds of information about what they are going to be required to do. They want to ensure they have the skills to be able to do the job properly before they commit to saying yes. So I think we could, I think that's self-esteem. Certainly we're seeing more and more board governance courses springing up. Probably if you're going to attract a woman on the board, she's going to want to ensure, she'll probably want to take a board governance course to ensure that she has the skill set to be able to do the job. So potentially, even if whether the charity can run them themselves or have philanthropic, I know Sharilyn and a lot of philanthropic advisors will run board governance courses to just give women the confidence that they can check off all the boxes, that they have the skills to do the job correctly. I think would be one great step forward in that direction.
Yep.
I'll just add to that. I've sat on some 15, 20 boards now. I'm actually chair of the Institute of Corporate Directors. And so I sit on private boards and not-for-profit boards. And in my experience, the not-for-profit sector has a lot more women in it than the private sector, for sure. In fact, the Rita Valley Wildlife Sanctuary, which I chair, has one lone guy on it. And he's a little overwhelmed, let me tell you. But there has been some really good research coming out on the private and the corporate, the more private and public side, that if you have, I think it's four or more women on your board, you have a 20% increase in success in revenue, in all kinds of things. So there's huge value in having women on your boards, and I imagine that the same would apply in the not-for-profit sector. There's a lot of great places if you're thinking of board work. There's a lot of great places that you can get a course. I understand you have one offered. The Institute of Corporate Directors is bringing their not-for-profit board fundamentals, I think in November here in Ottawa. I think Volunteer Ottawa has an excellent course that is a much better price range. And so there's lots of places. And if anyone's looking for that type of opportunity, you could go to the Volunteer Ottawa website. There's all kinds of postings for board work. So maybe we can encourage a whole bunch of women to start participating as of today.
Thanks.
I'll just add one more comment, and I think it's relevant to this research. If you look at where women's giving interests are, and then you look at our sector, and there's a haves and have not situation in our sector, right? And so the smaller organizations, the social service organizations, the less profile, smaller budgets typically, right? I would imagine, and I have no data to back this up, I would imagine that women representation is bigger on those boards. The larger organizations that are more complex organizations have the bigger budgets. I think that's where the issue of balance becomes a bit more challenging, and I think it's something for our whole sector to wrestle with.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yeah.
Setting up an advisory committee, because our board is a hands-on working board, and we find that a lot of people don't have the time to sit on that kind of board. But is it valuable to set up an advisory can help us with those connections to philanthropists and ideas about maybe corporate giving. Do you think that's valuable for a smaller organization?
We certainly heard during the research process that, that a number of advisory boards had been set up for that purpose, to really act as ambassadors as opposed to individuals who would be responsible for taking a decision or anything like that. Sharilyn?
I would say that's a fairly common practice to develop a body, and there are different names for that. The two things I would observe: one, having a clear terms of reference are always critical no matter what kind of body you're putting together. But also in terms of building the broader culture of philanthropy in the organization, that developing this advisory group is not a way for the board to say, phew, we don't have to do fundraising anymore, we have this body to do it. That it's an add-on, and that board members as a result don't kind of put their responsibility for the financial wealth, which includes philanthropy, for the organization on the shelf.
Well,
I think we heard, we heard a couple of complaints in some cases where people were put on boards because they have a big name or name recognition that they thought was going to get them all kinds of funds, and then they ended up not really doing anything. And so I think one of the suggestions is, if maybe that type of person could be on an honorary or on an advisory board, so there's an expectation that their name is going to help you, or they may be able to make some introductions for you, but they're not going to be doing the real work that an actual board would be expected to do.
thank you. Any further questions? Yeah.
Hello, my name is Fatima Sani. I'm a candidate in the Philanthropy and Nonprofit Leadership Program. Thank you all for being here. It's a very interesting report. And I wondered if you could speak to, either in your experience with the charities that you've been involved with, or generally, if you see women that are involved more in systemic change and investing in that in charities, and is that a distinctly female thing at all?
I don't think I'd want to say that that's distinctly female. I think this research alludes to that being of interest to women, and I think that's replicated in other research in other parts of the world. But I know some wonderful men who are also deeply committed to systemic change. I certainly from my experience with the YWCA and within the women's community as such, advocacy and social change is really just inherent in the nature of that community. And if you think of the changes in society over the years because of women coming together and using their voice and wanting to create systemic change, I think they've done that work because it impacted them, right? And so I think from a historical point of view, I think women have had a vested interest in change because they wanted their experience to be different. They wanted their daughters' life experience to be different. But I know that there are many wonderful men who care about those issues and other issues in terms of, if you think from a rights-based framework and social change. So.
I suspect that the interests, the variation in interest between women and between the genders is probably no different. Women are interested in a whole bunch of things, and men are interested in a whole bunch of things, and there's not much difference between them.
Well, except I have to that during the research, we did find that men are way more willing to write checks to support sporting causes. And I'll just leave it at that. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Joanne, a question for you, but before I ask the question, I just want to say thank you to you and your organization for funding the research and producing the report, which I haven't read yet, but I'm really looking forward to seeing. Because I suspect most of the people in this room and most of the people in our sector haven't had a chance yet to digest the report. I wondered if you could tell us, is there a forum, is there a point person, is there some focal point where we can turn if we have questions, if we'd like to start a conversation about some of the issues that I'm sure will be raised?
Sure. Thank you, Boyd. And so we have really, as I said, producing the report is just the beginning, and getting the conversation is. So one of the things that we are doing, and we're looking at planning something in Ottawa for the fall. We don't have a date set up yet. Is a forum to release the findings in much more detail and have a conversation about those findings. So at something like that, we're going to invite some of our TD clients that we know are interested in philanthropy. We'll invite the charitable community, and we're actually considering Carleton as a potential venue right now just because it has some great space. So we are doing that, and we'll certainly make you aware of that. However, we're starting to get calls right now from charities saying, can you please come and present the findings of this report to our board, to our major donors? We are having a dinner with our major donors and our board members. We really think that they need to know this. So we are happy to come out and to do that kind of presentation also. And so you know where to find me. I mean, I'm going to make one comment. Boyd runs SOS Children's Villages Canada, and they have villages in, I'm going to guess, about 160 different villages throughout the world that provide a very great family support service for children, orphan children. They could be orphaned by AIDS or by other tragedies. And I recently was dealing this. I'm sharing this because it's sort of related to this, but recently was dealing with a TD client who was a donor who was setting up. Looking at setting up some type of philanthropic plan, and came from a very remote village in India and wanted to be able to give back to that village, which he can give to SOS Children's Villages Canada, and they can direct it to any of those countries. But what was interesting in talking to this gentleman is why he is doing this and why he is giving back in this very meaningful way is all about his mother, and his mother was the discussion throughout, and how important of an influence his mother was in his life, and why philanthropy and giving back to the village that he was born in is going to be a very big part of his plan. So, and the last thing that came out, I'm just thought of it now as we're thinking about global charities. Some of the women who support, why they like to support global charities is they simply said, a dollar can be stretched a lot farther when you're supporting global charities than local. So that was just an interesting comment that came out in some of the focus groups also. Thank you.
Thanks, Joanne. We have time for one more question.
I'm just wondering if the whole concept of giving circles came up very much in your focus groups and in the research, because I actually looked into trying to join one. I'm a student in the program, and I really didn't see that much in Canada, and I was just wondering if you had come across much of it.
So, what giving circles do is they will get women together. They will they'll make a financial contribution together, and then they will assess organizations that they want to support. They're a little bit more popular in the U.S. However, we just had an event in Toronto. So an example of one in Toronto, but I'm sure it's not unique, is with the United Way, and that's called Women Gaining Ground. And so in Women Gaining Ground, these women get together, they agree to make a financial commitment to the United Way, and then they go through a whole process with the United Way to determine which social service agencies they want to support, and then monitor the progress of that. So in essence, that is a kind of giving circle. One of the programs they're supporting is Homeward Bound, a Wood Green program that tackles the very complex subject of how to get single women on welfare off of welfare, and they have a very unique program that provides them with housing, childcare, education, actually prepares them for a job at the end of it and breaks the cycle of welfare. So do you have any other?
Just if you're local, you might want to check out 100 Women Who Care. They did their first event just a couple of months ago, and I think their next one's in September beginning of September, and you can find them on the Facebook page.
And there's one at Carleton started by the students.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
One at Carleton started by the students. Is there a way to connect with them?
We'll give it to you.
Okay.
Okay.
Great. It will be passed around.
I feel like I'm interrupting a lovely conversation, but I am going to interrupt it and think that I hope that the conversation has just started. We've had questions about how to continue it, how to foster it, how to learn from it. And certainly I've learned from it as a school that values policy based on information and analysis. This is certainly food for thought. But at the same time, as we've experienced throughout the course, and as I suggested at the beginning, the personal element, the unique factor. For example, the way Coralie views impact and the way Joanne's clients do seems very different. And so, and as Jacqueline Nyman said at the very outset, there's no standardized way now to approach, to appeal. But yet we'll try to do that because it's so important to engage as many people and to particularly invite women into a sector in which they have so much to contribute. I've learned from this, and thank you very much collectively for your participation. Our discussion so far has been about women in philanthropy as practitioners, particularly as philanthropists. But let me say that women in philanthropy play many roles. And one of the roles is, as I say, trying to come up with the information that can be a basis for making policy to understand the sector. So actually being a researcher, being someone who can be a commentator or an analyst is very important. And I just wanted to say that next week in Münster, Germany, the International Society for Third Sector Research will be holding its biannual conference. And this is really the premier international organization, interdisciplinary, for looking at the third sector. And on a stage very like this one, there'll be someone who will be honored and for having submitted the best paper for 2013 to Voluntas, which is the premier journal, international journal on the third sector. And this year's recipient, who will be honored in a week's time, is being recognized for her paper Shining Light on Charities or Looking in the Wrong Place, Regulation by Transparency in Canada. And the author happens to be a woman, Susan Phillips. So I invite Susan Phillips to join me and to extend her thanks. Let me say that we are here because Susan had an image, Susan had a creativity, Susan was able to bring people together. As she will say, we have, and she'll pass on the many thanks we have to the people in this room. But let me say personal thanks. Susan, you are such a gracious, competent individual and a colleague I treasure. This is a great responsibility I've inherited after 9 years of Susan being the director of the school. I don't promise to last for 9 years, but I promise to try to live up to the example that you've set for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Callum, and again, thank you to our panel. I'm sure that tomorrow and our last day of the Summer Institute, the image of bunnies and bins will at least metaphorically play very significantly. I have the joy of saying some final thanks and celebrating and leading us into the next celebration. The celebration we want to make before we go into the reception, however, is a new practice that we are instituting now to honor the best paper by one of our students handed in for all of the courses that they did last year. This is a new award, and I would point out that it is as yet an unnamed award. I see an opportunity. So we have a committee. We took nominations and then reviewed the best papers, and I now have the envelope from the committee in hand, and I need a little drum roll for this. So this year's Best Student Paper Award goes to Melanie Boyd for her paper
Where is it? Oh.
For her paper, Philanthropolicy Making as Partnership, Power, Accountability, and Legitimacy in Global Health Government. It was originally done for the Globalization of Philanthropy course, which is one of our online courses. The paper was selected among many other excellent papers because it not only offered an innovative theoretical contribution to the field of global philanthropy, but it highlighted the fundamental tensions of philanthrocapitalism and the impact of hyper-agents on the agenda-setting processes of policy making. And I have to also tell you that we have students from all across the country and internationally. Melanie commutes farther. She telecommutes. She joins our online courses and comes to the Summer Institute from farther away than anyone else. About a week after she finished the Summer Institute last year, Melanie left for Kabul, Afghanistan, and has been there ever since, where she is now the interim director of the Aga Khan's work, important work, immensely important work in Afghanistan. Melanie, we're delighted to have you part of the program and this well-deserved award. I want to say some thank yous, and I won't be able to reach out to everyone. I want to thank all of our supporters, which includes Keith and Dorothy Sjögren, who set up a fund, a scholarship fund, to support a student who particularly wants to study in the arts. Donald K. Johnson, who also set up a student award. The McConnell Foundation, the Community Foundation of Ottawa, of course, TD Bank, and other supporters. We know who you are, and we thank you and appreciate that. We also want to thank our community partners. We now have over 200 organizations from across the country that work with us in providing placements for student practicums, in being the hosts for the important applied capstone project that students engage, and the many guests who came to our classes over the last 2 weeks. But I'd also like to say a very collective and a personal thank you to Carleton University. You can imagine the conversation with our dean, Andre Plord, who we have to particularly thank, that when we planned to set up this program, a little bit of his predecessor, that went something like this. Yeah, yes, Dean, we want to start an entirely new field. And no, it hasn't been done in Canada, and we see it as a bit of, have some business skills and have some policy skills, have some other skills, and yeah, we think we can get students. And have we ever done online courses in a serious way? Well, no, we've never done that before. And yeah, we do need to hire new faculty and staff, and we think we can do it. And the university said, do it, and we support you. We're not asking you to do it on the backs of existing resources. We'll give you new faculty. We'll support you in every way possible. So we thank our dean, we thank our president for all the ways in which they've helped make this possible. But perhaps most importantly, we need to thank our students who came to join us, who took such a big risk on us. We had one cohort join us last year, the first one, and this one. We were unknown quantities. Could we really deliver? Could we provide the kind of wow experience that we said the Summer Institute would be? We hope we have, and we thank all of you for taking that chance and for staying with us. And now please, join us in a celebration for the reception.